We all know the legend, right? The black turtleneck,
Oh,
the the almost magical way he could convince people of things, that reality distortion field people talk about.
yeah, exactly.
But way before the iPhones, before Apple was, this huge global thing, there was just a young Steve Jobs.
And that's where we're digging in today. Using Walter Isaacson's biography mainly, we want to look at those really foundational years.
Yeah, uncovering the maybe surprising origins of how he thought, how his vision came together.
Right. It's not just retelling the story you think you know. It's about finding those key early experiences, the decisions that really set the stage for everything else.
The innovations, but also that distinctive personality.
Definitely both. And hopefully you'll hear some connections, maybe have a few aha moments about where this iconic figure really came from.
Okay, let's get into it. One thing that jumps out early is this really strong sense of self he had, almost like he felt destined for something.
Yeah, and while we won't dwell on it too much, his adoption story likely fed into that feeling of being maybe chosen or different.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But maybe more direct day-to-day influences were his parents, especially his dad, Paul Jobs.
Oh, hugely influential. It was through his dad's work on cars that Steve first got his hands dirty with electronics. Not super deep, technically, maybe, but enough to spark something.
And it wasn't just fixing them in the garage, was it? It was going to the junkyards,
Right, the hunt for parts.
which ties into this other thing.
Yeah.
His dad wasn't just grabbing scrap. He was teaching Steve how to bargain, how to see the value in things.
Exactly. Paul Jobs was pretty resourceful. Isaacson tells that story about him buying broken cars for like $50, fixing them up over weeks, and then selling them quietly for maybe $250.
Wow.
Yeah, and that became this unofficial college fund. It shows that practical ingenuity, but also maybe a willingness to, let's say, bend the rules a bit.
A pattern, perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps. And you can see how learning to spot value and negotiate like that so early on would be a pretty useful skill later in business.
Absolutely. Then there's the house that they lived in, the Eichler homes.
Ah, yes. That's a big one for his design sense.
He actually quoted that later, right? Smart and cheap and good design for regular people.
Yeah.
He directly linked Eichler to Apple's core ideas.
He did. Those clean lines, the floor-to-ceiling glass, open plans, it was all about functional elegance, simplicity. It really imprinted on him.
It sounds like an early version of the Apple aesthetic.
Very much so. He loved what he called the awesome little features, like the radiant heating in the floors, things that made good design accessible, not just for the wealthy.
Yeah, democratizing design.
That was the idea, making great design part of everyday stuff without breaking the bank. That stuck with him.
But there was a bit of a conflict there, wasn't there? His dad had these strong principles, this work ethic, but they weren't exactly rolling in money.
No, they weren't. There's that story from 4th grade. The teacher asks what he doesn't get about the universe, and he says, I don't understand why all of a sudden my dad is so broke.
Oof, that's telling.
It really is. It probably gave him this complex view of value versus success. He admired his dad's integrity, refusing to be servile in real estate deals, even if it cost him financially.
So principles versus profit, a theme.
Seems like it was definitely an undercurrent for him early on.
And then there was that neighbor, the Westinghouse engineer, the beatnik type.
Right, just a couple of hours after school sometimes. But maybe another little window into a different kind of life, outside his immediate family.
Every little bit counts, I guess. But for tech specifically, Hewlett-Packard looms large.
Oh yeah, the frequency counter story is classic.
Building one as a kid is pretty ambitious.
Yeah.
For anyone listening, that's a device to measure signal frequency. Not exactly Lego.
Not at all. And then the sheer nerve.
To just call Bill Hewlett at home.
I mean, even back then, finding a number like that and just calling the CEO, it shows incredible confidence or maybe just a lack of fear.
Yeah, remarkable boldness.
And Hewlett's response, giving him the parts and offering him a summer job at HP. Imagine how validating that must have been for a kid like him.
Huge. Though the job itself, on the assembly line,
Wasn't exactly thrilling, based on his account, just putting nuts and bolts on things.
but he noticed the difference, right?
Mm.
Between the line workers and the engineers upstairs having coffee and donuts.
Yeah, he did. And you have to think that contrast maybe pushed him, made him want to be in the other group, the ideas group.
It probably cemented this idea that there were different ways to engage with technology.
Right. And then there's Haltech Electronics. Isaacson calls it a scavenger's paradise.
like his dad's junkyard, but for electronic bits.
Exactly. That parallel is important. He was just immersed in components new and used really early on. Gave him a feel and intuition for electronics.
So, okay, you've got this hands-on foundation, this technical curiosity bubbling up, but then the whole culture starts shifting around him.
Massively. Late 60s, early 70s Bay Area. It's counterculture central. Music, protests, new ideas everywhere.
And computers weren't initially part of that scene, were they? More like the opposite.
Not at all. The early view was often pretty skeptical. Computers were seen as these big, ominous, and Orwellian machines used by, the government or big corporations. Think Lewis Mumford warning about tech taking away freedom.
Right, the establishment's tools.
Exactly. But then you start to see this shift. People begin thinking maybe computers could be tools for individuals, for expression and liberation.
John Markoff wrote about that transition, and there was that Richard Brautigan poem.
All watched over by machines of loving grace. Yeah, this sort of techno-utopian idea starts creeping in.
It's fascinating how those worlds started to merge.
It really is. You even had Timothy Leary, Mr. LSD himself, eventually embracing personal computers.
And Bono's quote is great, too, about the pot-smoking, sandal-wearing hippies on the West Coast.
Seeing differently, right? Envisioning tech as personal, empowering. It's a neat perspective.
And right in the middle of all this, for Jobs, was the Whole Earth catalog.
Oh, massively important. Especially that final issue.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
That line just clicked with him, didn't it? Stayed with him his whole life.
Stuart Brand, who created the catalog, saw Jobs as perfectly placed, right? At that nexus of counterculture and technology.
Yeah, Brand said Jobs understood tools as extensions of humans. The catalog was all about tools for human use, which sounds a lot like Jobs' later focus on user experience.
Yeah, empowering the user.
Exactly. And you had other groups pushing this idea too, like the People's Computer Company.
Their motto was computer power to the people, very much of the time.
Absolutely. And then, boom, 1975, the Altair kit on the cover of Popular Mechanics.
That feels like the starting gun for the hobbyist PC revolution.
It really was. Even though it was basic, it showed it was possible. And you can bet Jobs and Wozniak were paying attention. It made personal computing feel real, tangible.
Okay, so zooming in on his personal life around then, moving to that cabin with Chris and Brennan.
Yeah, that was definitely him striking out on his own, pushing back against his dad a bit.
Seems like a really intense time for him personally. Poetry, guitar.
Self-discovery, for sure. And navigating that relationship with Brennan, which sounds complicated. She called him an enlightened being who was cruel.
Wow. That says a lot about those early contradictions in him.
It really does. Gives you a glimpse into that complex young personality.
And then Skull catches fire. The red Fiat.
Ah, yeah. Just spontaneously combusts. But even that little disaster leads somewhere.
Looking for work on the De Anza College bulletin board.
Which leads to that slightly bizarre job at the Westgate Shopping Center.
Dressing up in costumes. With Wozniak and Brennan for $3 an hour.
Yep. Apparently Wozniak kind of enjoyed it, interacting with the kids. Jobs, not so much, it seems.
Doesn't quite fit the image, does it?
Not really. Then comes Reed College. Short stay, but significant.
Right, this is where the spiritual exploration really kicks in. Baba Ram Dass's Be Here Now was huge then.
Hugely influential, yeah. Not just for him, for a lot of people in that scene.
And at Reed, he meets Daniel Kotke.
His fellow traveler, you could say. Shared interests in Zen, Dylan, psychedelics.
Kotke thought Jobs was really cool and high-tech. Kind of sums up that mix, doesn't it?
Perfectly. They really dove deep into Eastern philosophy together, reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Autobiography of a Yogi.
Setting up a meditation room.
Exploring psychedelics in the attic. It wasn't just casual interest. It seems like it genuinely shaped his way of thinking about focus and simplicity.
You can see echoes in his later design ideas, maybe. That minimalism.
I think so. That pursuit of inner clarity, stripping things down. It feels connected. And the India trip with Kotke was the next big step in that.
Trying to find enlightenment, but through asceticism, not really following one guru.
Right. More about the experience, the journey itself.
And it sounds like quite the journey. The shaved head incident with the guru.
Yeah, not quite the serene image you might have. And getting into a shouting match in a marketplace.
So not exactly peaceful bliss the whole time?
Definitely not. But then there's also that moment of generosity when Kotke's stuff gets stolen, Jobs helps him out.
Shows another side, maybe?
A more complex picture, for sure. And then he comes back after 7 months, barely any contact with his parents.
They must have been shocked by his appearance.
Understandably. Saffron robe, shaved head, Quite a change.
Which leads him back to Atari. Still got the robe, still carrying Be Here Now.
Yeah. Reconnects with Alcorn. And this sets up a really key early partnership moment. The breakout game.
Nolan Bushnell's challenge, right? Single-player Pong.
Exactly. And the kicker, a bonus if they used fewer than 50 chips. Bushnell knew Jobs wasn't the hardware guy, but he figured Jobs would rope in Wozniak.
Which he did. Wozniak loved the technical puzzle, agreed to split the fee.
And then Woz just crushed it, that intense 4-day deadline, working all night.
Pulls it off with only 45 chips. Incredible engineering.
Just brilliant. But then comes the bonus part.
Jobs didn't exactly play fair there.
No. He apparently told Wozniak the standard fee was all they got, pocketed the bonus himself, didn't even mention it.
And Wozniak found out years later.
Yeah, like a decade later.
Yeah.
And Isaacson says he was really hurt, disappointed. It definitely reveals a certain ruthlessness or maybe just a warped ethical compass in Jobs early on.
It's a shadow on that early success, for sure.
It is, but that success, even with the ethical cloud, it gave him some cash and, maybe more importantly, fueled Jobs' drive to start his own thing.
He felt something was happening, right, in the Bay Area then. That mix of tech, music, counterculture.
Yeah, he sensed it was a unique moment, a unique place, full of possibilities.
And he had this knack for seeing potential. He convinced Wozniak, who was happy, just giving away his designs.
Right, Wozniak was all about sharing the schematics.
That they should actually sell printed circuit boards, because most people couldn't build the whole thing themselves.
That was Jobs' insight. Seeing the market, seeing the business angle where Woz saw the pure engineering.
Wozniak even said it later. Every time I designed something great, Steve would find a way to make money for us. A real partnership in that sense.
Symbiotic, definitely. Yeah. And Jobs pitched it as a fun adventure. Even if they lost money, they'd have a company.
That must have appealed to Wozniak's spirit.
It seems like it did. That desire for something more than just a job. And then they put their money where their mouth was.
Selling the prized possessions. Was his HP calculator, Jobs' VW bus.
That shows real commitment, doesn't it? Pouring everything into this idea.
And just like that, Apple was officially born. The very beginning.
The seeds were planted.
So, wrapping up this first part of our deep dive, it's really clear, isn't it? That mix of brilliance and, well, difficulty. It was there right from the start.
Oh, absolutely. You see the technical curiosity right from his dad's garage in Haltech. You see the counterculture influence, that focus on the individual, on empowerment.
And that drive for simplicity. Even admiring the Eichler homes. It wasn't just about tech yet, but the principle was there.
Exactly. And you also see the start of those complex relationships, the high expectations, the ethical ambiguities, like the breakout bonus situation.
So for you, what's the big takeaway from these formative years?
I think it's how all these different threads came together. Junkyards, Zen Buddhism, electronics, counterculture ideals, early business hustles. It wasn't one single thing.
It's the combination.
Right. It's that unlikely fusion that laid the groundwork for someone who would, eventually change several industries. Understanding these roots is crucial to understanding the whole story.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How could experiences like scavenging car parts and going on a spiritual quest in India possibly lead to, well, to Apple?
Yeah.
It prompts you, the listener, to maybe think about your own path. What weird combinations in your background, what unexpected mixes of experience might actually hold the key to something innovative down the line. Definitely something to stay curious about.
And maybe a little foolish.
Maybe just a little foolish.